Have you ever stood before a painting, maybe a huge canvas, or even just seen a picture of it, and felt that pull, that feeling there's a story going on beyond the edges, layers of meaning sort of whispering across the centuries? Well, that's the amazing lasting power of really iconic art. And today we are doing a deep dive into one of the most, magnificent, timeless, and just captivating examples of that power, Sandro Botticelli's The Birth of Venus. And this isn't just, a painting. It's more like a visual poem, an allegorical masterpiece that keeps fascinating us, maybe even challenging us, all these centuries after it was made, right in the heart of the Italian Renaissance. We've been really digging into this incredible work, looking closely at the sources to try and uncover its complex layers, the history around it, and the pure artistic genius that makes it so much more than just, a beautiful picture. So our mission today is to unpack all of that for you. We want to show how even details that seem kind of simple in this big story actually hold really deep significance, sometimes in ways you wouldn't expect.
Yeah, get ready for some surprising insights as we journey into Botticelli's vision. Okay, so let's start by setting the scene for this amazing creation. We're in Florence around 1485. It's a time of incredible creativity, intellectual rebirth, right there in the middle of the Florentine Renaissance. Botticelli finishes The Birth of Venus, and boom, you're immediately pulled into this core mythological story. The amazing tale of Aphrodite, or Venus, as the Romans called her, appearing, like magic, from the sea foam. It's a moment of just pure wonder, captured with such incredible detail. It feels ancient, but also totally new at the same time.
It really is remarkable how deep the roots of this image go back into ancient classical literature. It's not like Botticelli just dreamt this up, right?
Yeah.
He was directly tapping into that rich source of ancient Greek writers, Homer for sure, but maybe even more specifically for this origin story, Hesiod.
Hesiod, right, the poet.
Exactly. In Hesiod's big poem, the Theogonia, we get it's a pretty intense, almost primal story of how Venus was created. It talks about the castration of the sky god Uranus by his son Cronus, and Uranus's severed genitals, believe it or not, fall into the sea, and from the foam that forms, Venus is born.
Wow, okay, that's quite dramatic.
It is. And Botticelli, who was totally immersed in this classical knowledge, and remember, Renaissance humanism was all about celebrating these ancient texts. He didn't just illustrate it literally, no. Instead, he reimagined it. He elevated these classical stories, turning what was, frankly, a pretty brutal, chaotic origin into this scene of calm beauty and divine order. He made a visual masterpiece that really clicked with the philosophical ideas of his time. He turned a text into an icon of cosmic harmony, really.
And what an icon she is. When you look at Venus in this painting, yeah, she's a goddess, but she feels like so much more than just a figure from myth. Botticelli shows her as the embodiment of ideal love, of deep beauty in nature itself, all reflected perfectly in a human form. So her birth becomes this incredibly meaningful event. It's not just her physically arriving on the shore, it's allegorical, isn't it? Like the reestablishment of cosmic aesthetic order, maybe moral order too, beauty and harmony being brought into the world. You can almost feel this sense of purity and newness coming from her.
And that brings us to something really revolutionary about how she's shown her nudity.
Right.
For people back then, this wasn't just about aesthetics, showing off how well you could paint the human body.
Right, it had meaning.
Deep meaning. In Renaissance art, especially with Neoplatonism influencing things, Venus's nudity was a symbol. It meant purity, renewal, a kind of divine beauty. It was a deliberate, really bold statement, especially since it wasn't a religious subject. This choice really showed the Renaissance focus on the sacredness, the naturalness of the human body. It was a clear break from the more ascetic views, the sort of body-denying ideas from the medieval period before it.
Challenging modesty by using classical ideals.
Exactly. So just think for a second. What does this ancient story, reimagined and shown in this specific, almost daring way during the Renaissance, tell us about how people were starting to see themselves, how they viewed their own bodies, and their place, maybe even their central place in the universe? It really was a huge shift in how culture saw things, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. A total shift, a complete rethinking. And the visual heart of that shift is Venus herself. She is undeniably the main focus of the whole scene, this timeless symbol of ideal female beauty that you see echoed all through art history. Her pose, her shape, everything about her just radiates ideal, almost unearthly in how perfect she looks.
And when you look closely at Botticelli's anatomy choices for Venus, it's obvious straight away that he wasn't going for the strict realism that a lot of his Florentine contemporaries were aiming for. Artists like Masaccio or Donatello, he wasn't doing that.
Right, it's different.
Very different. He was chasing an idealized form, something that looked back to classical sculpture. Her really striking, elongated height, that incredibly slender, almost impossibly long neck, her graceful hands, those soft flowing lines, it all fits with what they saw as the canonical beauty standards from ancient Greek and Roman statues, like the Venus Pudica pose, the modest Venus. And this was a conscious artistic choice, but also a philosophical one. This idealization wasn't just about making her look pretty superficially. It had this deep philosophical basis, especially influenced by Neoplatonism, that mix of Plato's ideas and Christian thought, which often stressed the divine nature of beauty and love. It reflected the belief that the human body, in its most perfect form, was considered closest to God, like a divine creation itself.
So it's spiritual perfection shown through physical perfection.
Precisely. Aiming for an ethereal beauty, not an earthly one.
And her face.
Wow.
That face. It might be one of the most mysterious and talked about parts of the whole painting. She has this really unique mix of, well, sadness maybe, melancholy, but also serenity, like a wistful, thoughtful look that seems directed inward. And you notice her gaze pretty quickly, or maybe the lack of it. She's not looking right at you, the viewer, or even at the other figures in the scene.
No, she isn't.
And that averted gaze just makes her seem even more otherworldly, emphasizing her sublime, almost untouchable nature, like she's not quite of this world yet.
Yeah, her expression, that averted gaze, it connects so strongly to the ideas of stillness and depth of meaning that were really valued in humanist art back then. It's not about catching a quick human emotion, but showing a profound, almost eternal state, a divine grace, you could say.
Yeah.
And there's also that subtle detail, but it's important. Her long, flowing, golden hair. It's painted with incredible delicacy, falling over her shoulder and chest, covering parts of her body just so.
Right, strategically.
Exactly. It's not just a realistic touch. It adds to the feeling of intimacy and sacredness around her, almost like she's just arrived and is still becoming. Modestly protecting her divine vulnerability, but also emphasizing her divine purity for us humans looking on. It's a clever touch that maybe helped soften the shock of her nudity for a 15th century audience, adding a layer of acceptable grace.
Okay, so moving away from Venus for a moment, our eyes get pulled over to the figures on the right. They bring this burst of energy and story into the scene. We see Zephyr, the god of the west wind, caught right in mid-flight, and tangled up with him, almost hugging him, is Aura. She's often called a flower nymph or maybe the personification of a gentle breeze. And they're actively involved in Venus's arrival, aren't they?
Oh, definitely.
Zephyr is blowing her towards the shore. You can almost see the wind. And Aura is scattering these beautiful, almost weightless flowers all around her.
And these figures, they're way more than just helpers from the myths. They're powerful symbols, acting as the forces of nature itself. They embody the renewal of nature, of life itself, this vibrant awakening that happens when Venus arrives.
The arrival of spring, almost.
Exactly like spring, Zephyr's presence is so dynamic. Look at his powerful wings, his clearly drawn limbs, the way his clothes billow out. It emphasizes his mythical nature and the force he represents. He really brings movement and life into the scene, which is such a striking contrast to Venus's central, almost statue-like stillness.
Yeah, the contrast is key.
It is, and their intertwined bodies beautifully show the symbiotic link between nature's harmony and the birth of love. The wind's breath isn't just pushing Venus physically, it's a deep metaphor for nature waking up, the freshness of spring and the profound life-giving arrival of love into the world. And those scattered roses, which have such a rich symbolic history themselves, often linked to Venus, representing beauty, love, passion. It's a brilliant visual metaphor for the cosmic forces bringing divine beauty into being.
Then over on the left, there's another crucial figure ready to receive Venus as she lands. She's often identified as one of the Horai, the goddesses of the seasons or hours, or maybe Harmonia, who personifies order and balance. Her job right then, as Venus arrives, is to cover the newborn goddess. Her gesture feels protective, almost like she's shielding Venus's nudity with that fancy patterned cloak, giving off this sense of respect and guardianship towards the viewer. Like she's preserving the sacredness of the moment, helping Venus transition from the divine world to the earthly one.
Yeah, this figure's role and how she's presented are loaded with meaning. That cloak she's holding, for instance, it's not just any old cloth. It's covered in intricate patterns, especially myrtle leaves, which were sacred to Venus, and spring flowers, again hitting that theme of renewal and nature.
Oh,
And we can't forget the amazing thing Venus is standing on, that huge scallop shell.
right, the shell.
It's not just a pretty stage prop, it's an ancient and powerful symbol itself. It means the sea, obviously, and birth, grounding her origins in those primordial waters. In different cultures, the scallop shell also symbolized pilgrimage, a spiritual journey, even fertility. It beautifully highlights the miraculous, natural, pristine aspect of her arrival. And what's fascinating is how this figure, the Hora or Harmonia, with her flowing dress and the feeling of movement about to happen, creates this striking visual balance to Venus's static central pose.
Right, it adds energy.
It does. This dynamic interplay, even though the painting's perspective is more allegorical than strictly realistic, actually adds a lot of dynamism and a sense of space to the composition. It sets up this rich visual conversation between the stillness of the divine, the active forces of nature, and maybe the civilizing aspect of humanity attending to it, guiding this raw divine beauty into a form we can understand.
The birth of Venus, it's not just a beautiful painting, is it? It feels like such a direct product of that intense intellectual energy bubbling up in Renaissance Florence, especially that movement we call humanism. It really feels like it couldn't have been born anywhere else or at any other time, like a visual declaration of its era.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
Which makes you ask, what exactly was humanism in this situation, and how did it lead to a painting like this?
Well, at its heart, humanism was this huge intellectual and cultural shift. It was marked by a passionate rediscovery, a revival of classical culture, the writings, the philosophies, the art of ancient Greece and Rome.
Looking back to the classic. Yes, but it wasn't just about looking backward. It was about mixing those ancient ideas with current thinking, putting humanity at the center of the universe, celebrating human potential, pushing for civic virtue, a well-rounded life. And Botticelli's work perfectly captures this. He didn't just paint a myth. He reinterpreted classical mythology, specifically Hesiod's ancient story, to glorify human nature and explore the deep meaning of love in a philosophical, almost spiritual way. He was using ancient stories and figures to express current philosophical ideas about humanity's potential, its importance, its built-in capacity for beauty and connecting with the divine. It was a real effort to blend classical wisdom with Christian thought.
And none of this would have happened, or at least not like this, without the massive influence of the powerful Medici family in Florence. They weren't just rich bankers or politicians. They were patrons on a scale we can hardly imagine, almost shaping the entire cultural scene in the city.
Oh, the Medici were absolutely a cultural catalyst. Their impact is hard to even measure. They weren't just a political and economic power. They were this crucial intellectual and cultural center. Their huge patronage directly made possible this incredible comeback of classical figures and mythological themes in art.
They funded it, basically.
They funded it, and they encouraged it intellectually. Lorenzo de' Medici, the Magnificent, and his cousin Pierfrancesco de' Medici, who probably commissioned this very painting, were deeply into humanist thought and Neoplatonism. They created an atmosphere where artists could explore pagan mythology not just for the story, but for its philosophical depth. Botticelli's Venus, specifically, was perfectly designed for the sophisticated taste and the intense intellectual interests of this powerful circle. He made Venus not just a mythological figure, but a universal ideal of beauty, informed by ancient texts, sure, but really shaped by current philosophical thought, like the Neoplatonic idea of beauty being a path to the divine in the social structures of the time. The Medici created the space where a work like this, which was pretty revolutionary in its subject and style, could be thought up, appreciated, and ultimately celebrated as reflecting their own refined values and philosophical goals.
This whole era feels like such a profound break, doesn't it? A huge shift in Renaissance art, away from what felt like the religious limits and the more ascetic focus of the Middle Ages. Suddenly there's this burst of light and focus on humanity, like a cultural spring.
Absolutely. And if you connect that to the bigger picture, this shift meant a new, exciting focus on realistic, though often idealized, portrayals of the human body and of nature itself, moving away from purely symbolic or teaching-focused religious art.
Right.
The birth of Venus shows this perfectly. It's not just celebrating the sacredness of the human form and the beauty of nature, it's also eloquently expressing humanity's deep connection with the cosmos. Venus coming out of the sea, bathed in light, attended by nature's forces.
Yeah.
It becomes this powerful allegory of nature reawakening, like a deep spring, and at the same time, humanity's journey of self-discovery coming into its own full bloom. This painting truly captures the humanists' belief in the inherent dignity and beauty of mankind. It fundamentally changed how people saw things. It makes you ask, how did this radical shift in art and philosophy pave the way for totally new ways of seeing the world and understanding our place in it? It really opened a new chapter for what art could show and make you think about.
Okay, let's zoom in a bit now on Botticelli's actual technique, the specific medium he used for the birth of Venus, tempera. This wasn't the oil paint that became dominant later on, right? It was something quite different, needing a special kind of skill.
Indeed, tempera is a fascinating technique and pretty demanding too. It's where you mix pigments very carefully with egg yolk, sometimes the whole egg, sometimes just the yolk, and then you apply it in thin, often see-through layers onto a prepared surface, usually wood panel or sometimes canvas back then.
Egg yolk.
Really? Yep. Egg yolk is the binder, and it dries incredibly fast, which means artists had to work quickly and very precisely. You build up the color and detail through lots of delicate strokes, rather than blending wet paint into wet paint like you can with oils. But this technique gives incredible clarity, a kind of luminous quality, and amazing durability, which is why we can still marvel at the birth of Venus today, with its colors still so vibrant after all these centuries.
What do you think?
And Botticelli's skill with tempera is just breathtaking. He managed to get these incredibly fine details, like the individual strands of Venus's hair that almost seem to float, or the tiny veins you can see in the leaves and flowers. He also achieved really soft transitions, especially in the subtle shading of Venus's skin, even though tempera isn't naturally great for smooth blending. These affects the ethereal lightness of her hair, the crisp outlines, the almost glowing quality of her skin. They're perfect examples of his mastery over this challenging medium.
Beyond the brushwork itself, the painting's composition is just completely captivating. It's clearly not trying for super realism or a normal sense of depth. There's a balanced, almost musical placement of the figures and a very symbolic, almost poetic use of space that feels uniquely Botticelli.
That's a really crucial point. What's particularly striking is that Botticelli's use of perspective wasn't about creating a realistic sense of space receding into the distance, like you might see in works by contemporaries like Piero della Francesca, or even later high Renaissance artists.
No, it feels flatter somehow.
Exactly. Instead, he arranged his figures and the space around them based purely on their symbolic and allegorical importance, not on strict mathematical perspective rules. So the spatial depth in the birth of Venus isn't really classical or realistic, it's mythological and allegorical. This means the figures kind of appear on a single plane, almost like actors arranged for a play. This helps communicate the meaning and the timelessness of the event, rather than a specific measurable moment in space.
Ah, okay, that makes sense.
And that's also why the dynamic, almost frantic movements of the wind gods Zephyr and Aura and the flower nymph create such a striking contrast with Venus's almost static central pose. This deliberate visual tension really elevates the whole scene, turning it into a sacred and universal moment, a timeless event that goes beyond ordinary time and space. The focus is all on the ideal form and the message, not on tricking the eye.
And then there's the color palette. Botticelli's very distinctive choice of colors adds yet another layer of poetic beauty to the whole thing. It's not just colorful. It feels profoundly serene, almost like a dream.
Yes, indeed. His palette is overwhelmingly dominated by these soft, almost dreamlike pastel tones. They really do mirror the gentle, new colors you find in nature during springtime. You see the bright, almost pure white of the sea foam painted so delicately, the warm, inviting tones of Venus's skin, which has this almost see-through quality, the gentle pastels of the scattered roses and maybe orange blossoms too, and the clear, calm, light blue of the sky over the turbulent but still beautiful sea. This carefully chosen palette isn't random at all. It plays a huge role in creating a uniquely poetic, serene, and deeply idealized atmosphere. It perfectly matches the work's spiritual and allegorical core, wrapping the whole scene in a sense of divine calm, purity, and new beauty. It makes the sacred feel almost touchable, inviting you into this world of ideal beauty and harmony.
So Botticelli's The Birth of Venus really does go way beyond just showing a mythological scene. It's not just a story painted out. It feels like a deep experience, this complex web of symbols woven into a huge allegory. Every brushstroke, every figure, every little detail seems packed with deeper meaning.
Yes, that's absolutely right. When you start thinking about the painting's deeper significance, its powerful allegorical side really comes through. It's not simply about Venus physically arriving. It's a grand allegory for the deep rebirth of nature itself, spring awakening after winter. It's about the awakening of love in its purest form and the blossoming of creative power in the world.
Which fits perfectly with the Renaissance itself, the rebirth.
Exactly. It aligns perfectly with that broader intellectual and artistic rebirth that defined the whole era. Every single element in this masterpiece is just layered with this deeper symbolism, pulling the viewer into a space for contemplation.
Okay, so let's start to unpack some of these key symbols and what they're actually communicating. First off, the very stuff of her origin, the sea foam.
Right, the sea foam. It's a really potent primal symbol. In classical mythology, it's literally the substance Aphrodite or Venus is born from, so it directly represents the very origins of life. It also carries ideas of purification, of a pristine, untouched state. It's the raw, chaotic element from which perfect order and beauty emerge. It suggests that even from apparently formless beginnings, something divine can just arise. It speaks to creation ex nihilo, maybe out of nothing, but here it's more like out of chaos, a kind of cosmic alchemy.
From chaos comes beauty.
Precisely.
And that huge scallop shell she's standing on. It's almost as big as she is, like her little boat.
The shell, especially the scallop, is just packed with symbolism beyond just birth and renewal. It's an ancient symbol of the sea, obviously, but also of pilgrimage. Think of the Camino de Santiago, where pilgrims carried scallop shells. That implies a journey, a passage from one state to another, maybe from the divine world to the earthly one here.
Interesting.
It can also represent fertility, the vulva, the divine feminine, just based on its natural shape. Plus, its smooth, symmetrical perfection can be seen as embodying sacred geometry, a natural form reflecting cosmic order and divine design. Venus emerging from it specifically highlights this natural, pristine, miraculous arrival, emphasizing her connection to the basic forces of nature.
Okay, Zephyr and Aura, the wind gods and the flower nymph, they seem like more than just background characters. They're literally blowing her into the world.
They absolutely are. They embody the active forces of nature and the dynamic, energizing movement of love itself. Zephyr's breath isn't just a breeze, it's the very force spreading love and beauty through the world, kicking off spring and awakening life. And in some myths, Zephyr is linked with Flora, the goddess of flowers, which just reinforces that imagery of springtime and natural fertility you see in Aura's actions.
Right, the flowers everywhere.
Exactly. Those scattered flowers aren't just decoration. They symbolize nature's vibrant awakening, the fleeting beauty of life, and the constant renewal that love brings. They are the active agents of this new, beautiful world, creating this vital, living atmosphere around Venus. And their dynamic energy contrasts so beautifully with Venus's calm stillness, highlighting her timeless, eternal quality while they represent the forces of change and becoming.
And finally, let's circle back to Venus's nudity. We touched on it, but let's really underline its profound symbolic weight here, especially in this context of all these layers of meaning.
Yes, definitely worth reiterating. Her nudity carries huge symbolic weight, far beyond just being sensual. It represents both purity and divine beauty, an unadorned perfection that's beyond earthly ideas of modesty. It connects directly back to that Renaissance Neoplatonic belief in the human body's inherent perfection as a reflection of divine creation. They saw the body in its ideal form as sacred, a manifestation of God's own artistry.
So it was a radical statement.
It was a statement that perfection in nature, and therefore in the human form, was inherently good and beautiful, not something to be hidden or seen as sinful or fallen. So taken all together, the painting works as this profound visual expression of humanity's inherent harmony with nature and its deep spiritual connection to the cosmos. It really encourages you, the viewer, to see beyond just the surface, to appreciate the intricate layers of meaning packed into every single element, from the biggest figure down to the smallest flower petal.
There's really no doubt, is there? The birth of Venus stands as this powerful, undeniable symbol of the huge cultural shift brought about by Renaissance humanism. It's almost like humanism's greatest visual hit, expressing so much of what that whole movement was about.
It truly is. It powerfully backs up humanism's central idea. that humans aren't just an integral part of nature, but also, in a philosophical way, the very center of the universe, endowed with reason, creativity, immense potential.
Right.
And the figure of Venus in Botticelli's amazing rendering perfectly embodies this incredible meeting point of human nature, the natural world, and ideal beauty. She is the perfect blend of classical wisdom and Renaissance innovation, inviting us to think about our own place in the grand scheme of things. It's a statement that beauty and divine grace can be found through the human form, not just through rejecting the world or through purely ascetic spirituality.
The painting also puts this tremendous focus on the vital role of love and creative power in human life. It's more than just retelling a classical myth. It's a deep statement about the nature of love itself.
It really does push our understanding of love. What's fascinating is that the Renaissance view of love, especially influenced by Neoplatonism, was much bigger than just romantic feelings. It was seen as this powerful, creative, and deeply transformative force, a cosmic principle almost, something that could lift the human spirit, drive artistic creation, and bring order out of chaos.
Like Venus being born from the chaotic sea.
Exactly like that. So in this context, Venus, in Botticelli's masterful painting, stands as the ultimate mythological embodiment of this universal and sacred power of love, the very force that brings beauty and order into the world, inspiring not just passion, but also intellect and spiritual growth. It's a love that fills the cosmos, a driving force behind all creation.
And it all happened in Florence, didn't it? This incredibly dynamic political and cultural hub during the painting's creation, all under the careful watch and generous funding of the Medici.
Absolutely. Florence in the 15th century was this unmatched furnace of innovation. The Medici family's incredible patronage fueled an unprecedented Renaissance boom in both art and science. It created an environment where artistic and intellectual experimentation just exploded. It really was a golden age for the city.
Must have been amazing to be there.
Oh, undoubtedly. And within this incredibly fertile and innovative place, artists like Botticelli skillfully used mythological and classical themes, not just as pretty decorations, but as sophisticated ways to reflect both individual ideals and universal hopes for society. The birth of Venus remains one of the most tangible, lasting, and eloquent examples of this truly revolutionary period in human history. It's proof that art, philosophy, and patronage can come together to create something that not only defines an era, but speaks to us centuries later. Hashtag outro.
It's truly remarkable, isn't it? How a painting made way back in the 15th century, born from ancient myths and soaked in the philosophical excitement of the Renaissance, can still connect so deeply with us today. It really makes you wonder, how do our modern ideas about beauty, love, and nature keep echoing? Or maybe how do they differ from the profound ideals captured so magnificently in Botticelli's The Birth of Venus? It's a question that spans centuries, doesn't it? Inviting us to think about our own values, what we find beautiful, sacred, true.
What an incredible journey through a truly timeless masterpiece. This deep dive, well, it's really just scratching the surface of understanding the huge depth you can find in these works. So next time you find yourself looking at a Renaissance painting, or really any piece of art that catches your eye, I really encourage you. Look beyond the obvious surface, trying to seek out those layers of meaning, the whispers of history, the philosophical ideas underneath. You might just be surprised by what you discover and how deeply it connects, maybe unexpectedly, to your own world today.